My curse was lethal, and it always came true. When I was 8, my adoptive mother kicked me into a freezing river. I stared right at her and said, "When you go into the water, you'll drown." The very next day, she drowned in a ditch where the water wasn't even knee-deep. The realization that my words could actually kill people scared me into silence. From that moment on, I stopped speaking entirely. A year ago, the Morton family brought me home. Desperate to keep their affection, I refused to utter a single word. But today, seconds after sipping the soup I'd brought her, Melissa Morton, the girl who'd been swapped with me at birth, collapsed. She convulsed on the floor, her face turning a mottled purple. "There's peanut powder in the soup," one of the maids screamed. Before I could even react, my twin brother, Tristan Morton, kicked the glass table, shattering it. Then he grabbed me by the hair and shoved my face into the shards scattered across the floor. "You knew Melly was severely allergic to peanuts," he yelled. "How dare you put that in the soup?" Mom injected Melissa with an EpiPen, then spun around and slapped me across the face. "A monster like you doesn't deserve to be part of this family." Dad hurled his scalding coffee right at me, his expression livid. "You snake. I can't believe you tried to kill her just to get our attention." The hot coffee mixed with the blood on my face and dripped onto the floor. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to endure the pain. They had no idea that if I actually wanted her dead, I wouldn't need to go to such lengths. All I had to do was speak a curse. Like right now. I slowly lifted my head and stared at Melissa. My lips parted. Asterisk. "It wasn't me," I pushed out, managing only a hoarse whisper. For the past year, I had carefully buried my voice, terrified that a single wrong word would destroy everything with my newly found family. I still remembered my first day home. Dad had made a pot of beef stew just for me. Mom had held my hand and promised I'd never have to suffer again. Even Tristan, who looked ready to kill me now, had once stood up for me at school. He'd taken a brutal beating to protect me from boys who mocked me for growing up in the sticks. Because of that, I endured everything in silence, content to live like a shadow. "Stop lying," Tristan shouted. "You were the only one who went into the kitchen. Who else could have done it?" He bent over, grabbed the cross necklace around my neck, and yanked it violently. The silver chain bit into my skin, leaving a bloody scratch right across my throat. Mom had given me that for my birthday last year. She had climbed all the way up to a mountaintop chapel to have it blessed, telling me it would protect me for the rest of my life. "Don't touch it," I thrashed, reaching out to snatch it back. Tristan kicked me hard in the chest, knocking me flat on my back. Then he turned away and pressed the necklace into Melissa's hand as her breathing started to level out. "You wearing that is a blasphemy," he spat. "Only an innocent girl like Melly deserves it." Melissa leaned weakly against Mom, tears streaming down her face. Yet, her fingers closed tightly around the necklace that belonged to me. "Mom, Dad, don't blame Lorena," she coughed out. "She had a rough childhood. It makes sense that she's jealous of me. If hurting me makes her feel better, I don't mind dying for her." The hatred in my parents' eyes deepened at her words. Mom pulled Melissa closer and glared down at me. "Melly nearly died, and she's still trying to protect you. And here you are, still won't admit what you did." "Melly has always been kind-hearted. She wouldn't even hurt an ant, let alone risk her own life just to frame you." Dad pointed toward the door, his face hardening. "Throw her in the backyard storage shed and lock her in for 3 days. It's time she learned we Mortons don't tolerate this kind of cruelty." Just like that, I was locked in a windowless storage room. It was freezing, and I was dressed in nothing but a thin, damp shirt. Just on the other side of the wall, the living room was flooded with light. The family doctor's steady reassurances and my mother's terrified sobs filtered through the drywall, carving a hollow ache deep into my chest. Late the next night, the door clicked open. Melissa stood over my stiff, shivering body, bundled up in a heavy puffer jacket with a flashlight in her hand. "Wow, Lorena, why are you lying there like a corpse?" She looked nothing like the weak, pitiful victim from earlier. Her eyes gleamed with smug satisfaction. "You know who actually added the peanut powder?" She crouched down, shining the flashlight directly into my eyes. "I did. I just wanted to see who actually mattered to Mom, Dad, and Tris, you, the biological daughter, or me, the adopted one. And guess what? Blood doesn't mean a thing. Even though you're related, you can't compare to me at all." My lips were blue from the cold. I just stared at her with cold indifference, not saying a word. I in that moment, the last fragile hope I had that the Mortons might one day truly accept me shattered completely. When I didn't answer, Melissa sneered and pulled a pocket knife from her coat. "Tell me, Lorena, if Mom and Dad catch you stabbing me for revenge, do you think they'll send you straight to prison or just beat you to death?" With that, she raised the blade and slashed a deep, bloody gash across her own arm. The moment the blood gushed out, she tossed the bloodied knife down next to my hand and let out a shrill, agonized scream. Lorena, what are you doing? I just came to check on you. Why are you trying to kill me?" A split second later, Tristan kicked the door in. Mom and Dad rushed in right on his heels. They immediately spotted the blood on the floor and Melissa sitting there, violently shaking. "Melly." Tristan scrambled over to her. With tears in his eyes, he ripped off his jacket and pressed it hard against her wound to stop the bleeding. Spotting the knife by my feet, Mom let out a shriek. She lunged forward, driving the heel of her shoe hard into my chest. "You monster. You are absolutely sick. Melly snuck out in the middle of the night to check on you before she's even recovered, and you pull a knife on her." The kick slammed me back against the wall. My vision went black, the breath completely knocked out of my lungs. Melissa leaned heavily against Tristan, gasping in pain, but she reached out to grip Mom's hand. "Mom, don't hit her. It's my fault." I knew she hated me, but I got too close and set her off. That only threw gas on Dad's fury. His face was pale, his hand shaking violently as he pointed a finger at me. "You just don't learn, do you? You're completely hopeless. Why did we ever bring someone so vicious into this family?" Tristan scooped Melissa up into his arms. "She came down here out of the goodness of her heart, and you do this to her? You're beyond help." They hurried out, fussing over Melissa, their faces tight with panic. The door slammed shut and the lock clicked into place once again. 3 days later. The door finally opened. A pair of bodyguards dragged me out and dumped me onto the floor of the brightly lit main hall. It was the night of the party the Mortons were throwing to help Melissa recover from her shock, and the living room was packed with guests. Dad stood on the staircase, pointing down at me, his voice booming over the crowd. "I want all of our relatives to bear witness to this. The daughter we brought into our home is deeply malicious. Over an inheritance, she slipped peanut powder into Melly's soup to trigger her allergy, and just days ago, she tried to kill her with a knife right here in our own home." Mom clutched Melissa's heavily bandaged arm, her eyes rimmed red. If Tris hadn't gotten there in time, Melly would be dead. "The Mortons can't keep someone this dangerous under our roof." The relatives circling us sneered, jabbing their fingers in my direction. "She grew up poor and vicious," someone muttered, "and that's never going to change." "Melly is so sweet. Who could even do something like this?" another added. "Just call the cops and have her locked up." Tristan dug his shoe hard into my shoulder, pinning me to the floor, and threw a severance agreement right in my face. "Sign it. Thumbprint, too. Then get on your knees and apologize to Melly in front of everyone. When you're done, pack your bags and head back to the country. You're not getting a single dime from the Mortons." Shivering from the cold off the floor, I stared up at them. "I already told you," I rasped, my throat completely dry. "I didn't spike the soup. And I didn't cut her." "Ms. Lorena did spike the soup," a young maid interrupted, stepping out from the crowd. It was the same girl who had accused me earlier. Just then, Jayla Garrison, the maid who took care of the backyard, pushed her way through the huddle and dropped to her knees. "Mr. and Mrs. Morton, it really wasn't Ms. Lorena. I was cleaning the hallway outside the kitchen that day, and I saw it right through the window." Ms. Melissa poured a packet of powder into the soup herself. Melissa froze for a split second, then quickly ducked behind Mom, her shoulders shaking. Furious, Tristan crossed the room in 2 strides and kicked Jayla hard in the chest. Jayla was an older woman. The blow sent her sprawling hard onto the floor. She stayed down, a trickle of blood leaking from the corner of her mouth. "You lying old hag, what kind of garbage is that?" Tristan spat. "How much did she pay you to come out here and frame Melly?" Dad scowled, waving his bodyguards over. "Stupid woman. Drag her out to the yard and beat her. When you're done, Throw her off the property. A few massive guys rushed forward, grabbed Jayla by the hair, and dragged her out. She screamed and fought back, but that only made them hit and kick her harder. I watched them beat an older woman bloody. Just because she'd told the truth for my sake. I violently coughed up the blood that had been pooling in my chest. I had endured their abuse and swallowed every ounce of their mistreatment, all for the sake of family. In return, they were brutalizing an innocent person just to protect a chronic. Liar. Stop hitting her, I choked out, struggling to my feet. But Melissa dropped to her knees first, sobbing until she was gasping for air. Mom, Dad, please don't be mad. It's my fault. Lorena had it so hard growing up. It's only natural she hates me. Jayla probably just felt sorry for her and wanted to help her lie. Please, just take the agreement back. I'll move out tomorrow. I'll give her my place in the family. I just want her to stop trying to harm me. Mom looked absolutely heartbroken. She turned her glare on me. Look at what you've driven Melly to do. Tristan grabbed me by the collar, hauled me up, and slammed me hard against the table. The sharp glass corner caught my forehead, and warm blood immediately trickled into my eyes. Are you going to sign? Tristan demanded, staring at me with pure venom. Because if you don't, I'll break your hand right now. Dad looked down at me with ice in his eyes, like I was his sworn enemy. You are no daughter of the Mortons. If you don't confess today, you aren't leaving this house. Pain and an icy chill washed over my body all at once. I looked at the three people who actually shared my blood, and whatever affection I had left for them evaporated. They didn't care about the truth. They just needed a scapegoat. I looked down, slowly swallowed the metallic taste of blood in my mouth, and let a cold smile touch my lips. Raising my head, I looked right past Tristan and locked eyes with Melissa's tear-stained face. Fine, I said. I confess. I finally stopped holding back. My voice rang out, clear and loud. I put the peanut powder in the soup, and I'm the one who slashed her in the storage room. Dead silence fell over the hall. I caught the unmistakable flash of triumph in Melissa's eyes. Tristan scoffed. So you finally admit it, you spiteful woman. Get on your knees and bow. I ignored him. They had no idea that if I really wanted her dead, I wouldn't need to go to such lengths. All I had to do was speak a curse, just like right now. I slowly raised my head, looked Melissa dead in the eye, and parted my lips. Not only did I spike your soup, but I want both your legs to snap at the hips. I want your flesh to rot and fester. I want you to spend the rest of your life paralyzed in a bed, just waiting to die. Melissa's expression shifted the second the words left my mouth. What the hell are you talking about? She tried to yell. Then, a sharp crack echoed through the room. Right in front of everyone, Melissa's legs bent backward at a grotesque angle. She let out a blood-curdling scream and collapsed heavily onto the floor. Seconds later, clusters of blood-red blisters erupted across her arms and neck. The blisters burst, oozing yellow pus. Melly. Mom collapsed to the floor in terror, her voice cracking into a shriek. Tristan and Dad rushed toward her in a blind panic. The hall went dead quiet, filled only with Melissa's distorted wails of agony. An ambulance arrived soon after, sirens blaring. The paramedics hurried to lift her onto a stretcher, her legs mangled and her body festering, his eyes red with fury. Tristan ordered the bodyguards to grab me by the arms and drag me all the way to the hospital. The red light above the ER doors clicked on. Out in the hallway, Mom covered her face, sobbing uncontrollably, while Dad paced back and forth in distress. Tristan grabbed me by the collar and slammed me against the cold wall, gritting his teeth. What kind of freakish poison did you use on Melly in that storage room? If she dies, I swear I'll kill you. Half an hour later, the head ER doctor pushed through the double doors, looking pale and grim. The Morton family immediately swarmed him. Doctor, how's my daughter? The doctor shook his head and handed them a critical condition notice. The patient's leg bones have inexplicably shattered, and she's developed an extremely rare, acute fungal infection. Large areas of tissue are already necrotic. We need to amputate both legs above the knee immediately. If the infection hits her bloodstream and reaches her internal organs, she won't make it. You need to sign this right now. Amputation. Mom fainted, slumping helplessly into Dad's arms. Tristan stumbled back in shock, his hands trembling. Just then, the lab tech who ran Melissa's pre-op blood work walked over. He stared at the report in his hands, looking totally baffled. Family of the patient? When you brought her in, you mentioned she had a severe history of peanut allergies, right? I just checked her antibody levels. She isn't allergic to peanuts at all. She doesn't have any predisposition to allergies. In fact, her overall health markers are better than average. Dead silence fell over the hallway. Tristan whipped his head around. That's impossible. Melly hasn't been able to go near peanuts since she was a little girl. She went into shock this afternoon after taking just one sip of soup. The lab tech frowned, pointing at the data on his clipboard. Well, there's definitely a small amount of peanut powder in her stomach, but it didn't trigger an allergic reaction. What actually caused her to go into shock was the medication she took beforehand to deliberately induce heart palpitations. Tristan stood frozen, the lab report trembling in his hand. Mom and Dad had stopped dead in their tracks, staring in absolute shock. Just then, a nurse wheeled Melissa out of the ER. Her pre-op prep finished. The excruciating pain had kept her awake. And it was obvious she had overheard the lab doctor. Faced with the undeniable proof, panic flashed across Melissa's face for a split second before she reacted. Ignoring the agonizing pain in her legs, she practically lunged off the gurney, grabbed the hem of Mom's shirt, and burst into heavy tears. Mom, I'm so sorry. I lied to you guys. I wasn't really allergic. I was just scared, she sobbed, her voice shaking as she gasped for air. Ever since Lorena came back, you've been entirely focused on her. I'm not your biological daughter, and I was terrified you'd throw me away once your real daughter was home. Faking the illness, taking those pills to simulate going into shock. It was just my way of testing to see if you still cared. She gripped Tristan's wrist tightly, gasping through her tears. Tris, Lorena hates me. I hurt myself and faked all of this just so I could stay with you guys. That confession instantly wiped out whatever anger the Mortons felt over her lies. Looking absolutely heartbroken, Mom leaned over the gurney and cried even harder than Melissa. No, it's my fault. I neglected you. Don't blame you for lying, and I'm going to take care of you for the rest of your life. Dad took a deep breath, crumpled up the lab report, and chucked it onto the floor. He wheeled around and pointed a furious finger right at me. Lorena, did you hear that? Your resentment and hostility drove Melly to hurt herself just to test us. Tristan stood up and marched over to me, glaring with blatant hostility. Are you happy now? You destroyed her legs. You made her feel completely worthless. Faking the illness, taking those pills to simulate going into shock. It was just my way of testing to see if you still cared. She gripped Tristan's wrist tightly, gasping through her tears. Tris, Lorena hates me. I hurt myself and faked all of this just so I could stay with you guys. That confession instantly wiped out whatever anger the Mortons felt over her lies. Looking absolutely heartbroken, Mom leaned over the gurney and cried even harder than Melissa. No, it's my fault. I neglected you. Don't blame you for lying, and I'm going to take care of you for the rest of your life. Dad took a deep breath, crumpled up the lab report, and chucked it onto the floor. He wheeled around and pointed a furious finger right at me. Lorena, did you hear that? Your resentment and hostility drove Melly to hurt herself just to test us. Tristan stood up and marched over to me, glaring with blatant hostility. Are you happy now? You destroyed her legs. You made her feel completely worthless. As soon as Melly's out of amputation surgery, I'm calling the cops. I don't know what kind of sick trick you used to cripple her, but you're going to spend the rest of your life in prison. Watching their absurd little pity party, my very last shred of hope for a real family connection vanished completely. I didn't even react to Tristan's threat. I just pushed his hand away. Call the cops if you want, I told him. I'll be right here. I looked down at Melissa on the gurney, sweating from the pain, and gave her a small, indifferent smile. You should probably hurry up and sign those amputation consent forms, though. She loves faking illnesses for sympathy, right? Well, now her legs are permanently ruined. She can stay in bed without faking it anymore, which is exactly what she wants. My words sent Tristan into an absolute rage. He whipped out his phone right then and there and dialed 911. Hello, 911? I need to report an assault. Someone here intentionally caused severe injuries. Please send officers right now to arrest the attacker." He hung up and moved to block the hallway exit. Mom and Dad made zero effort to stop him. Instead, they looked completely supportive. Dad scoffed. "A dangerous person like her belongs in jail. It'll keep her from causing us any more trouble at the house." 2 police officers showed up at the emergency department less than 20 minutes later. Tristan intercepted them immediately, pointing directly at me as he yelled out his accusations. "Officers, she's the one. She was jealous of my sister, so she attacked her with a knife in the utility room and used some kind of dark magic to break her legs." The officer frowned, looking back and forth from my small frame to Tristan. "Some kind of dark magic? Please just stick to the facts, sir. What is the victim's current condition?" Tristan insisted I was guilty, demanding the cops cuff me right then and there. When the officers asked for my statement, I just held out my hands, keeping my voice steady. "I'll cooperate, but you need to search the Mortons' house. Look for the fruit knife in the utility room, and check the kitchen trash." They took me down to the station, where I sat quietly in a holding cell all night. Honestly, away from the Morton family's constant insults and blatant favoritism, I got the best sleep I'd had since moving back to the city. The door finally opened at noon the next day. The investigating officer walked in and handed me a file, his tone a lot softer now. "Lorena, you're free to go." I stood up and walked out of the cell, stepping into the lobby just as Tristan and Dad arrived. They totally panicked the second they saw me walking around freely without handcuffs. "Officers, why are you letting the suspect go?" Dad yelled. "My daughter just had her legs amputated this morning. She's still in the ICU." Captain Edward Larkin, the lead investigator, dropped a stack of forensic reports onto his desk. "Mr. Morton, it seems you have a habit of filing false reports. We ran forensics overnight. You claimed Lorena stabbed her, but every single print we pulled off that bloody fruit knife belongs to Melissa." Tristan stared at him in disbelief. "That's impossible. Lorena must have forced Melly to do it." Edward cut him off. "On top of the knife, our medical examiner went down to the hospital to look at Melissa's injuries. Her leg fractures and skin ulcerations show absolutely zero signs of external trauma. They were caused entirely by a sudden, severe medical condition." Edward stared down the 2 pale, shocked men, his voice hard. "You filed a false police report to frame your own daughter. If you pull anything like this again, I will arrest you." The lobby fell dead silent. The captain's words completely humiliated Dad and Tristan, proving them wrong. Tristan stumbled back a few steps. "How is that even possible?" "She did this to herself," he muttered, clearly remembering how pitifully Melissa had cried and complained outside the ER. She'd claimed she just wanted to test the family's love, but who cuts themselves with a knife just to send their sister to prison? This wasn't about insecurity. She genuinely wanted to ruin my life. Dad's hands were shaking violently. He was remembering throwing a cup of scalding coffee at me and locking me in that freezing utility room for 3 straight days. Meanwhile, they'd cradled the real culprit in their arms, offering her endless comfort. Ignoring their devastated looks, I headed straight for the station doors. "Lori." Dad finally snapped out of his shock and chased me out the door, panic edging his voice. "Lori, wait. I made a mistake. I completely misunderstood you." I stopped and turned to look at the man who had once promised I'd never experience hardship again. "Misunderstood." I let out a short, harsh laugh. "Before the police showed you the evidence, you wouldn't even look at you only cared about making sure. I spent the rest of my life in jail, and now that you know she was faking it, you think a quick apology fixes everything?" Tristan hurried out after us. His eyes were red, and he reached out to grab my sleeve. "Lori, I'm sorry. She really fooled me. She always acts so fragile. I never expected her to be so manipulative." I took a step back to avoid his hand, physically repulsed. "Don't touch me. You threw those disownment papers at me yourself, and I took the blame right in front of our relatives. As of yesterday, I have absolutely no connection to the Morton family." I flagged down a taxi and climbed inside without looking back. After I left the Morton family, I rented a small studio apartment in an older part of town. It was a far cry from living in a mansion. but it kept me safe from the toxic people who used to scheme behind my back. A few days later, I was taking out the trash when I spotted Tristan crouched outside my building. He looked completely gaunt, his eyes totally bloodshot. In his hands, he held a container of my favorite beef stew. He sprang to his feet the second he saw me, looking desperate. "Lori, please come home," he pleaded. "Mom's been crying so much the last few days that her eyes are swollen shut." Melly had the amputation, but the blisters on her body are still festering. It doesn't matter how expensive the antibiotics are, they just won't clear the infection. He couldn't hide the disgust in his eyes when he brought up Melissa. We moved all her stuff into the first-floor guest bedroom and hired 2 caregivers just to wait on her. "If you agree to come back, you'll be the one running the house from now on." I looked at the container of cold food in his hands and took a step back. "Tristan, she brought this entirely on herself." I dusted my hands off. "You guys cared about her so much before. Now that she's bedridden, you can spend the rest of your lives taking care of her. Don't ever try to contact me again." 6 months later, I moved out of that neighborhood. Using my savings, I took over a small restaurant near the university. On opening day, I brought Jayla on board. After she'd spoken up for me at the Morton's house, they had beaten her severely and thrown her out. Now, she was working as my head chef, making a generous base salary plus a monthly cut of the profits. I hadn't gone out of my way to check up on the Mortons over those 6 months, but the gossip still found its way to me. Word was, their daily lives were an absolute living hell. After Melissa's amputation, the fungal infection in her leg wounds turned out to be completely incurable. The blood-red blisters had spread above her waist, bursting and oozing foul-smelling yellow pus. To treat her, the Mortons brought in specialists from all over the world, dropping over $10,000 a day on specialized, imported meds. But Melissa's deteriorating mental state was way worse than her rotting body. Stripped of her legs and her looks, she couldn't play the pitiful, helpless victim anymore. Rumor had it that at the slightest provocation, she'd throw scalding hot medicine right in the caregivers' faces. They burned through caregiver after caregiver until finally, nobody would take the job. That left the Morton parents to tend to her themselves. Every single day, they had to empty her bedpans, clean her decaying flesh, and endure Melissa's hysterical cursing. That was, at least, until the 3 Mortons showed up at my door again. "Lori, here are the deeds to the family's 3 remaining commercial properties and the villa. We've already transferred all of them into your name. If you just come back, you can call all the shots from now on. The 2 of us will do all the heavy lifting and take care of you, just to make up for the 20 years we neglected you." Tristan hung back behind them. He stared at me, his eyes bloodshot and his voice a hoarse rasp. "Lori, I know I was way out of line," he said. "I made a massive mistake defending that vicious girl. Please, just forgive us and come home." I stood there with a cleaning rag in my hand, quietly watching this ridiculous trio. I didn't even bother glancing at the deeds. Honestly, the sheer absurdity of it all was deeply amusing to me. "Are you done?" I pulled out a chair and sat down, staring at them cold and hard. "You guys used to treat her like royalty. You thought she was faking sick just to make you happy, and you wrote off all her malicious behavior because you genuinely believed she just cared about you too much. So what happened? Now that she's actually sick and stuck in bed for good, is taking care of her suddenly too much work?" My mother's crying stopped dead. My father's face darkened. I stood up, snatched the stack of documents off the table, and threw them right in my dad's face. The papers fluttered all over the floor. "Take your worthless papers and get out of my shop," I told them. "She's reaping what she sowed. And you guys made your own bed. Since you were so desperate to take care of her back then, you can spend the rest of your lives doing exactly that. Don't even think about dragging me back to that house." "Lori," Tristan pleaded, suddenly lunging forward to grab my hand. Before he could reach me, Jayla burst out of the kitchen wielding a meat cleaver. She planted herself squarely between us. "Don't touch her," she yelled. "Get out right now, or I'm calling the cops." Tristan looked at the cleaver in Jayla's hand, and then at the absolute resolve on my face. His last shred of hope evaporated. My dad helped my mom up from where she'd collapsed on the floor. Looking completely defeated, the 3 of them stumbled out into the snowstorm. They never showed their faces at my shop again. Word got back to me later that the Morton's company eventually went under. To cover their debts. Tristan sold the villa and moved his parents and a paralyzed Melissa into a damp, dark basement apartment. He worked construction every day, hauling heavy bags of cement. What little money he made was barely enough to afford the cheapest antibiotics. Melissa, meanwhile, had no choice but to lie there on a moldy mattress. She watched her own body waste away day after day, listening to her parents constantly curse and complain about having to deal with her. She would spend the rest of her life in paralyzed Melissa into a damp, dark basement apartment. He worked construction every day, hauling heavy bags of cement. What little money he made was barely enough to afford the cheapest antibiotics. Melissa, meanwhile, had no choice but to lie there on a moldy mattress. She watched her own body waste away day after day, listening to her parents constantly curse and complain about having to deal with her. She would spend the rest of her life in that bed, totally helpless until her dying day. This wasn't just some prediction of mine, it was the direct, harsh reality of the choices their family had made. The end. I hope you enjoyed my stories. If you liked them, share your thoughts and comments. Also, if you want a particular story, write that story name in comments. I will try to publish that. Thank you.